This is a very special story for me, one that I've wanted to share for a while. I'm always going to remember 2005 fondly because it was the first time I ever got to truly have the D&D experience with my high school friends. It didn't happen until we had already graduated high school, but we were all still close after we had become college students or worker drones. The memories of this game have managed to endure and inspire me ever since. We had a friend in high school, Damien, who owned the core books for 3rd edition, but admitted he'd never actually read them. He would try to run games in his parents' basement, which never really amounted to anything more than us rolling dice, him deciding if we succeeded based on his opinion of the roll, then have his DM PC solve the puzzles instantly if we were taking too long. This was not the D&D experience we wanted. Maybe I'll try to recall those stories someday, if I ever get into D&D nightmares. As is usual, I'll be calling people by their character names rather than the real ones. I'll be referring to myself in the first person while telling the story, but I'll shift to referencing my character by name when talking about abilities and scenes of harm outside of combat. The cast of this campaign are as follows. Garrick, my longtime friend since grade 7. He played a human sorcerer who had only 14 charisma and 9 strength because the poor guy rolled terrible stats, but still decided to keep them. He started the game with fewer hit points than a commoner. Gia, my high school ex who I've stayed friends with even to this day. She played our human cleric of Heronius with a chip on her shoulder and the party's only heavy armor wearer. At the time I never thought to ask, but she later confirmed it was the DM who suggested she play the healer. She wanted to play a more combat-oriented character, so the war domain allowed her to do both. Logan. A few years older than us thanks to failed grades, lived in the same village as Liam and Damien, the stereotypical chaotic neutral elven rogue, who played exactly as you'd expect a chaotic neutral rogue to be played by a first-timer. He would be a pain in my side for pretty much the whole campaign in and out of game. His bedroom being right next to mine didn't make things any easier. Liam, a hyperactive guy who was all about thug life and anime codes of honor, best friends with Damien. He played a martial artist built using a 3rd edition supplemental document we found on the internet. His stats were great, except for his 7 intelligence, so he tried to roleplay as an expert combatant who didn't really understand much else. And Yugoth, my character. He was my half-orc monk, built not understanding that monks do best with deck, so he had a 19 strength at level 1. We decided that Liam and Yugoth were from the same monastery and considered each other brothers who protected each other. And DM, younger than all of us by a few years, had all the necessary 3.5 edition books and know how to teach us the game. Really good at making the story run smoothly without us feeling railroaded. Not that we really understood terms like railroading. So after graduation, there was a lot going on and getting together for a D&D game was the furthest thing from our minds. College was taking up most of my life, with 40 hours of class and clinic time each week. Of our group, Logan and I were the only ones who had moved out, while everyone else still lived with their parents in a rural area far outside the city. Gia was the only one of us with a car, and the others were quite a far drive in the opposite direction. All that is to say, getting together was a chore at the best of times. One winter's night, Gia popped in to introduce me to this new guy she started dating, DM. We hung out at DQ with some other friends of his, and I found out he was part of the university cheerleading team. Him being 6'7", it was quite the surprise to learn. We bonded over a wrestling match on a snowbank, which left us both with some cuts and bruises to laugh about after. Respect was earned that day, and I felt like he was going to do well as part of our ragtag band of misfits. After hanging out for some months and integrating into the group, he told us he had been playing D&D and other TTRPGs since he was little. He had access to a D&D red box, and his older brother figured out the game bit by bit. Seeing how enthusiastic we were, and hearing about our lackluster experiences, he offered to DM a game for all of us at his place. It took a while, but by spring we all managed to find the time to give it a worthy try. Session 0 wasn't really a thing at the time, and first meeting at his campus house was just a chance for us to take turns using his one copy of the player's handbook. None of us had any concept of party balance or min-maxing stats at the time. We just looked through the classes and races, skipped over the lore, and made a stop at the local nerd store to pick out dice so we didn't have to mooch off his hefty collection. Damien was also there for character creation, insisting that he be allowed to play a chaotic evil Death Knight from the Dungeon Master's Guide. He was kind of an edgelord like that. And since he only ever played in evil games or one-shots in the past, his long-term thinking for a heroic game was lacking. Thankfully, he dropped out before the first session was planned because he was prone to starting drama, and being Gia's ex right before she started going out with the DM wouldn't have helped that. If he had decided to stick around, this story would be a lot more cringe and possibly much shorter. This kinda set the stage for Damien's exit from our friend group as he gradually stopped coming around after that. For session 1, we, sans Damien, met in DM's cramped kitchen. 6 of us sitting around a small kitchen table covered in paper, pop cans, and Doritos. To set the stage, our party had been hired to guard a supply caravan making its way to the small village of Swampsettle on the edge of a marsh that fed into the ocean. Of course, as is the cliché, we made our way to the nearest tavern upon arrival. We settled down and tried to figure out what we were supposed to be doing when DM decided it was time to teach us the ways of combat. 2 patrons, basic fisherman-type gents, suddenly stood up, eyes glazed, and walked over to us. Garrick tried to engage in some chatter with them, only to be met by one of them taking a swing at him, and the other trying to grapple my hulking half-orc. Due to some hilarious bad rolling on our part, Liam tried to jump across the table but ended up falling over it. Gia and Logan tried using the broadsides of their swords to knock them out and ended up doing minimum damage. Garrick avoided combat altogether, afraid of taking even the slightest amount of damage with his 4 hit points. I missed every attack that Yugoth made. Luckily, we were all laughing our heads off at the bad rolls and the fact that we weren't really taking any damage either. After the fight, when we somehow managed to knock them out, the town guards came to investigate. The attackers were woken up, but had no idea why they attacked us, and didn't really remember anything about the fight. Suddenly, there was a scream from the bar. We rushed over to where the bartender was. She said something was in the cellar. We went behind the bar and saw inky blackness creeping out of the cellar. We proceeded down, and the DM described a face leering from the darkness. Doing what I figured any half-orc would do, I lunged for it and tried to fight it, only to get wrapped up and choked out for the rest of the battle. Liam tried to join in the fight, and he also got beat down, leaving Garrick, Logan, and Gia to fire ranged attacks from the bottom of the cellar stairs. It was pretty embarrassing to be beat down by a single choker, but we learned some valuable lessons that day. Mainly that we needed new dice because ours were rolling like garbage. When we came back from the basement, a crowd had gathered at the entrance to the tavern. The mayor of Swampsettle invited us to walk with him and apologized for the strange attacks. He led us to the center of town, where DM described a gaunt, yellow-skinned figure chained by the wrist to a post. Having looked through the monster manual, I leapt to the conclusion that it was a hobgoblin. DM did nothing to make me think otherwise, saying, "You've never seen a hobgoblin before, but from the descriptions in books and secondhand knowledge, this does sound like what you'd assume a hobgoblin looks like." The mayor explained that they had caught the stranger sneaking around the village during our fight. It was somehow captured by a group of guards and put in shackles for interrogation, but refused to speak in any other language but its own. Leading us to the town hall, the mayor explained that recently the swamps were getting more dangerous. The lizard folk who inhabited the swamp had always avoided Swampsettle, but lately had been coming closer to the settlement's territory. We were offered the job of investigating what could be causing them to become so bold after centuries of keeping their distance. Our party rested for the night, recovering from our embarrassing near defeat at the hands of a size-small creature. Next morning in the tavern for breakfast, we were approached by a trapper named Jerix. He said he knew the swamps better than anybody, and the mayor had told him we would need a guide on our investigation. There were ruins to investigate if we wanted. This was our first big choice of the game when it came to exploring. We could either head north or west of Swampsettle to explore various ruins. We chose north for no particular reason, and headed out into the forest that bordered the swamp. DM described us walking for a few hours in relative silence, the idea of sharing backstory during travel not having registered with us yet. We did get some local lore from Jerix, about how centuries ago there had been a powerful and wealthy wizard who had built a grand fortress in the swamp, which sank beneath the muck, leaving only a few ruins poking above the muck, now overgrown. It was possible something left over from the fortress was causing the recent lizard folk interest in Swampsettle. We came to a clearing, and DM had us roll spot or listen. We all failed miserably. Suddenly there was an ambush by small lizard folk, probably reskinned kobolds, and one hulking large lizard folk. Gia finally got a chance to show off her spells, other than healing, and threw up a sanctuary around Jarix and guarded him while the rest of us got into the mechanics of fighting multiple enemies to the death. Liam at the time was trying to call all his blows non-lethal because he wanted to play his character as a goofy, innocent, and peaceful, childlike person. It turned out Jarix was okay with the knife, but other than that, he was just a level 3 expert, one of the DMG's NPC classes, something I really missed from the 3.5 games. A few of the kobolds went for him, and Gia showed her decent war cleric sword skills. We whooped them eventually, and finally started to feel good about our little first level character's survivability. We traveled a bit longer before reaching a tower sticking out of the muck at an angle. It was covered in vines, and examining it, we found a half-sunken window big enough to give us entry. Piling in, we were quickly attacked by a lone sturge. If we had thought the momentum from the previous fight would continue into this battle, we were mistaken. Once again, I nearly got taken out by a creature a third my size. The Sturge's blood-sucking abilities were focused on Yugoth, and I don't know why I always felt the need to be the tank with only 15 AC, but I did. And I still do. Just as things were looking bad, I managed to roll my first crit of the game, and I confirmed it, something from 3.5 I don't miss. The Sturge went splat with a haymaker, and we were able to look around the mostly empty ruins. We found some carvings in a language none of us spoke, so I took the Sturge's needle nose and used it like a quill, with the Sturge's blood as ink, and copied the writing onto my own monk's robes to translate it later. We did a quick fade back to Swampsettle, facing no opposition along the way, and that ended the first session of our Swampsettle game. We'd been at it for over 6 hours, and we're all feeling the high of the game and probably way too many caffeinated drinks. We were allowed to level up since we'd fought so many things, and from then on we were hooked. Everyone agreed to get together in a week to continue the adventure. And if you'd like to follow along on this story, you can subscribe and click the bell if you want to let you know next time I post. The campaign takes us from Swampsettle across an ocean to a desert ruled by half-giants all the way to the astral plane, all over the course of 8 months. So until next time, thanks for joining me. Stay safe out there.